the conversation will take an entirely new twist. And the people that are around me in my life, the conversation will generally take, I mean, you'd probably enjoy the twist, but I can't guarantee that TikTok wouldn't live ban the twist. So I'm just going to put that out there and not. So, since I had to learn how to be able to, ensure that the way that I was coming across was a little bit easier on that too, right? So I'm also over on YouTube. Let me go ahead and add the tag for the YouTube. If I stop the comments, if I turn the comments off, which it will depend on the comments themselves. If I turn the comments off, you can always go to the YouTube and comment. If you have questions that you're trying to get answers for, and I will always turn the comments back on so that you can ask questions later, at some point when it calms down, when I've gotten through a subject. This behind me is Denny. Denny was 13 when she died. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm probably missing half of the highs. I see a few people popping in though, and very much love to everybody coming, and thank you so much. And making this space such a intelligent, knowledgeable, diverse, safe space, right? Like, I love the fact that my friends list, the people that I send things out to, the people that I see come in, the people that I interact with, their knowledge is diverse. Like this, I mean, they are, what we would consider diverse on any level, but, the diversity of intelligence, of knowledge, a quest of knowledge, of that want of knowledge that comes in means that everybody is able to, even if I'm not able to answer a question, somebody in chat usually answers the question, right? Even if I am preoccupied in answering a different question, somebody in chat is able to answer the question for me. And so that for me is really a positive, which is why I hate it when I have to turn comments off because people are rude, right? So that one makes me, we are at, yeah, I think that's one of the most valuable lessons that I got from my mother was that the day you stop learning is the day you start dying, is what she taught me. Like there was this idea in my brain that we were knowledge producers, knowledge gatherers, knowledge seekers, right? That's what human is to seek knowledge, to want more, to want to understand better, to want to conceive better, to want to understand better, right? And because we are gathering of knowledge, the day you stop learning is the day you stop growing, is the day you start dying. And I can remember that from like really young. I mean, I had to have still been in the single digits, right? And I can remember that concept, and that for me stuck. So Denny, you've all heard about Denisova Cave, right? Where the new species of human came out of. Denisova Cave is in Russia. And not the newest new species, but the species Denisovan came from, which is one of the big ones that's in the news because of the fact that we now know that we have genes from the Denisovan, right? So Denny was found from a piece of thigh bone that's about this long. With the exception of like a mandible piece, most of what we have found on Denisovan themselves all fits in the palm of the hand. Denny herself is not Denisovan. She's half Neanderthal and half Denisovan. She has a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. And this is just a brilliant understanding and concept. She's the first hybrid that we have found that's actually, we can see the genes of both species. We can actually are of two different species, and we can track those genes in humans, right? And because anything that falls underneath the genus Homo is human, right? So underneath the genus Homo Denisovan, Homo Neanderthal, Homo meaning human in Latin, Denny, and the Neanderthals and Denisovans and all these others are human. And so she is the first human to human hybrid that we have. Well, the first hybrid of human at all, because there's not human to anything else kind of hybrids out there. So we know she was 13 years old when she died. We can extrapolate this from her DNA, from the whole genome that we got out of her thigh bone, right? And when we can extrapolate this from the whole genome that we got out of her thigh bone, we can extrapolate mother and father and who is who. And we can also extrapolate now out of one of the Max Planck Institutes in Europe, the concept of the different markers and alleles within her DNA, giving us the understanding of her skin, giving us the understanding of the way the oils and stuff on her skin works, just like we now understand the way the oils and stuff on other, one second, I got to open the door yet again. Just gives us enough of a concept of understanding that we're able to extrapolate an image. And that's how we got this image of Denisova. There are a few artists out there, of Denny herself, there are a few artists out there that will do extrapolation from skulls, which she obviously only being a thigh bone. We don't know. We can't extrapolate how she died, right? We can, because we're looking at a piece of thigh bone. That's all we got of her, is a piece of her thigh bone that's about 2 inches long. And when I'm holding up my fingers like this in front of my eye, this is the size of the thigh bone. If you go and you research, and she's actually on the webpage. Let me go ahead and pull up Denny right now on, if you're following along on YouTube, you can see that I have my webpage and Widda Ord open. And on my webpage, I keep a lot of different bibliographies for you to go and find this information and dig in deeper, find more. Because like we were just talking, you know, that quest for knowledge is such a human thing. It's such an us thing, right? And so you can go and you can dig in and find for more. And let me see, I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure actually that she's underneath hybrid children, which in bibliographies is up at the top. There's the Lepedo child. There's a couple of different ones in here, right? Because we have a couple that we think might be hybrids, but we don't have DNA from them. So we don't know for certain that they are hybrids, right? And so with Denny, she's going to be the one that says ancient girl's parents were two different human species born 900,000 years ago. So she's 900,000 years old. Now that didn't pop up right on the YouTube. So hold on one second and I'm going to go ahead and put that over onto the YouTube so you can see it. So she's 9,000 years old and she was 13 when she died. Now, I apologize, because I don't pay for things like National Geographic. And so you'll probably get a couple National Geographic views out of this. Let me actually go. I didn't realize that that's what was on the website. Let me find an article on her that we can actually view. And I'll make sure and get that translated over. So let's try it through. So she was, and it's going to be a little harder for me while I am trying to find an actual article that will pop up for us. Maybe I can't find it that way. Let me look at it that way. Okay, well, I'm not going to stay on it for too long, because if I stay on it for too long, it will totally not work for me. Oh, there's one. It's right down below. Sorry. See my brain. This is where I scroll. So it's the second one, and you can actually see the thigh bone in this one. Let us internet right. With her, what we can extrapolate from this is her age. We can extrapolate her mother and her father and which species her mother and her father are from. We can extrapolate the timeline. We can't extrapolate death because, like I said, we just have a piece of her thigh bone, and off of a piece of a thigh bone, you can't extrapolate a whole hell of a lot. I don't know if that's my internet or what, but it's just not pulling it up. Okay, so you can go to either one of those articles and be able to read either one of those articles on your own. They are on the page. I'm going to go ahead and have the on YouTube. You can see the piece of the thigh bone. It is literally this big. There is discoloration on the thigh bone, and there's like, or on the bone, like, and it looks pitted and stuff like that. But that's not evidence of violence or anything else at this point, because when we're looking at Denisova Cave is like thousands of pieces of bones scattered along different layers in this cave. I can't remember what it is that they believe it is a collection of, right? Or why they're all there. But it is literally thousands of years and thousands of bones. And the way that they're pieces of all of the bones, like you're not finding articulated skeletons, you're not finding, so there's evidence of some like I believe there's evidence of like drag marks, but at the same point there's evidence of them living in that, not drag marks, but like drug, like taken, like predation, evidence of predation, brain work, evidence of predation, but there's also evidence of living in the cave over extended periods of time. So I can't tell you if they're all there because of predation and that's why they're all small pieces, or if they're 1,000 years of living and being exposed while other people are living in the area and things like that. So a few different ways. No, I can't tell you if that's it or not. That's what I'm saying. Like I can't remember between the several different things that I have seen what the conclusion is. What I can tell you is that we're looking at layers of hundreds of thousands of years of small bits of bones, not huge articulated skeletons, not like I see your thigh bone. They range from, like, the way we found the Denisovan species is from a fingertip, a phalange, the very tip of the human finger, right? And it looks almost like your nail, like it's very thin and small, and it looks like almost like a nail with a nub on it, right? And so that's how we found our first Denisova species. And of all the Denisova that we have, they all fit in the palm of your hand, of all of these skeletal pieces of Denisova that we have, right? And we have like, they may have increased it since the last time I saw it, but I think we have like 7 or 8 pieces of Denisova. These include a small chunk from the base of the skull, which shows us pathways for language, which shows us that they had speech, right? And by pathways for language, let me specify, I mean vocal speech, syllabic speech like we do, right? Because every species on this planet communicates. I need to shut my door because my dog finally decided to come in. Every species on the planet communicates, right? They now know that trees communicate with each other through their roots, and they form matriarchal clans in vast forest nations. And that's trees. They communicate completely and utterly. So we have the knowledge that we've recovered the knowledge. We've now listened again and understood the knowledge that everything communicates, that the whole entire world is an organism, a biome, all of its own, right? So when we're looking at Denny, this is what we know on Denny. We know she was 13 years old when she died. We know she has a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. We know that from her DNA, what her eyes and what her nose and what her facial structure is likely to have been like, right? So we don't know how she died. We can tell sometimes from bones whether or not somebody has had a baby from the actual way that the chemical changes in the bones have happened. It's not necessarily, I mean, sometimes you can tell from like hip spread and stuff like that, absolutely. But generally it's from the chemical changes in the bones when they finally decided that they could tell. But you can't tell they probably haven't gotten that kind of information because they probably don't have the chemical changes within her DNA, right? And it's also a little bit different when you're looking at a different species to understand what the chemical changes in that different species would be to show in the bone, right? And stop. You're being a toddler and it's not acceptable. Would you like a toy? There's a toy. Would you like to cuddle? Let me grab a blanket. But you cannot be demanding of time and attention. Thank you. So when we all have melanated skin. Oh, we froze. We froze.
You're fucking.
I don't know what my TikTok popped up into. I apologize. It was going so good. I didn't think it was going to happen again. It's been doing this constantly on me. I apologize. I do not know why we keep freezing like that. If it freezes like that, I will come back. I promise. I'll tell you if I have to pause something. But if I freeze like that, I promise I will come back. So I had seen something. We're all melanated. Melanation is in everybody's skin. Higher melanation per square inch, like higher condensation of the melanation per square inch leads to darker skin, right? But we're all melanated. Your eyes are melanated too, right? It's all melanation. It is absolutely. Go and find some information. Go Google. Go to Google Scholar and Google. It is melanin. It's melanin that the colors themselves are all based on melanin. And what it is we are all the same. We're all the same color. We're just different shades. We're all fucking brown. We're just different shades of brown. And because of the way that melanin works in your skin okay, so we're at 162. Let me do this first. This is my space. And in my space, I have to set boundaries because people get shitty in my space. They can't understand or deal with or want to deal with the things around them in a positive manner, right? And they don't want to look into more things, whatever. A lot of them just want to troll, whatever it is. People get shitty in this space and I don't deal with shitty. Okay, so this is my space. TikTok gives everybody with 1,000 followers a space. And you can use your space in whatever way you want to use your space. I use my space to give education. I am an anthropologist. I am an archaeologist. I am a historian. I am a storyteller. I have been these things. I'm a healer. I've been these things my entire life. I've been studying these things for 40 something odd years, and I'm not 40. I'm about 46. I have to remember, right? Not that I give a flying fuck because the gray streak's the best thing in the whole wide world, right? I am here to give pebbles of information. I have degrees, and I know that all of this shit is gate kept behind $40,000 a year paywalls. And I know that all of it is written in language that even people who started reading in archaeological texts still sometimes have to Google words. And I have a very verbose vocabulary. I don't use it frequently anymore because it's, in its own sense, racist to fucking use big words that people can't understand to try and keep information from the masses. And I'm here to give free information to the fucking masses. That's it. That's all. Every day, every time. I will teach you in here how race was debunked. The theory of race was created by my field of anthropology by a bunch of old white dudes trying to justify their atrocities. And the theory of race was debunked when multiple individuals from across the globe came together into the Whole Genome Project. And we realized that you are more genetically diverse within a primary population than between primary populations, meaning you and your neighbor are more genetically diverse than you are from somebody in Sweden or in Africa or in Asia, right? Because inbreeding affects us and you want to have a wide variety of genes so you're not inbred, right? Okay, so race has been debunked, and I don't deal with race in my chat or racism in my chat. If you're going to be racist in my chat, you need to go somewhere else. You'll be shut down. You will not like my response, and you will not like the response of my mods. Okay? I also don't deal with phobia based on gender and desire. There are 3 sexes biologically, male, female, and intersex. The same percentage, 2% of the population is intersex. And then there's also a different 2% of the population that's redhead. There's also a different 2% of the population that's green-eyed, right? So every time you see a redhead out there or a green-eyed person out there, you could be seeing, for every one, you can be seeing another person that you don't even know that's intersex. And it's been scientifically proven that your outside organs don't always match your inside organs. Why? Because nature doesn't give a flying fuck what you do about gender. Nature don't care about your concept that's like 100 years old. Literally. You know, we had transitioning surgeries in the late 1800s where people fully transitioned successfully, right? So I'm not going to deal with any phobias based on gender and desire in my chat as well. I also don't deal with phobias based on religion. There's a lot of shit going on. And if you think somebody's God either gives right to act in a specific way or means that you should hate them, then you need to take that shit elsewhere as well. Not in my chat. If it gets really shitty in here, I will turn off the comments because I have to turn off the comments. My mods usually are very on top of it, very trying to make sure for everybody, but they can't always keep up, especially if it gets bad. And so if they can't, we'll turn off the comments or turn them to subscriber only. Not that I ask you to subscribe. I couldn't give a flying fuck, but it gives a little bit of a block, a little bit of a step that somebody has to take, just like you can go over to YouTube and comment. It gives a little bit of a step and it weeds out a little bit of the troll, okay? So we all have melanin in our skin. Melanin is what makes the color. In us, it's a different type of melanin that makes the color. In your dog, melanin is what makes color. The amount of melanin per square inch changes every generation depending on the amount of sun the mother gets when she is pregnant with that child. If you're pregnant with one child in South Africa and you're outside every day, that child might be a couple shades darker than you. If you're pregnant with another child in Sweden and you're outside every day and you're not getting anything else from the sun and from the environment, that child might be a couple shades lighter than you. That's 2 children that you specifically had. We now know that about the alleles in skin and the way that they dictate the melanin per inch within your skin to dictate the shade that you are in the color that we all share. Period. Okay. And that is absolutely anthropology and archaeology, if you were just saying. So when we are dealing with different species, when we are dealing with different spaces around the planet, right? And we're looking at the ancient of it, and we're looking deeper into it, right? We can see through the DNA and through the genetics, things like Denny behind us on the wall. When we were talking about Denisova Cave and talking about the different layers, we're talking thousands and thousands of bones. We know that Denisova Cave was occupied between, I think it's like 140,000 years ago to like 27,000 years ago, because it was also occupied by Homo sapiens. When we're looking at Denny, who was the girl behind me on the wall, what we extrapolate from her is there is within that time period of living together, of interacting in together, that there is absolutely hybridization that can be seen in the genetics. This is a first generation, a child of a mother from this species of Neanderthal and a father from the species of Denisovan. So two different species, right? We're learning a lot within the last, 5 years. There's been so much information that's just been flooding out through our new research, through the new understanding of genomes, through the new understanding of the way genetics work, through to the new understanding of how our genetics are working, right? Because as we're gathering more information, it broadens and deepens the understanding. As we're bringing in people from across the globe, especially bringing in people who have different concepts of life and of living, right? So when you're bringing indigenous people in, when you're bringing in, you know, well, more indigenous people across the globe than anything else, because when you're looking at that different concept of reality, but also when you're bringing the ancient concepts of medicine that have been able to exist in Asia, that we can trace all the way back to Otzi and the tattoos on Otzi, right? That we can actually like see a flow of those concepts going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? And a maintaining of them. These are also indigenous concepts that are bringing in new concept and new idea, because they are indigenous concepts that weren't changed, that weren't westernized, that weren't adapted to the colonizing of the Western influence, right? So when we're looking at having the new mindsets coming in and having the new understanding of the world coming in, that shift actually shifts the way that we are understanding science, that we are understanding the story of who we are, right? Let's go ahead, because we started, Denny isn't really on the topic board, right? But we started with Denny because somebody had brought her up, and we talk about her frequently because she's amazing. Let's go ahead, though, and shift into science and medicine being indigenous concepts. Just because as we're looking at the finds, what my brain keeps trying to grasp onto, and what I'm trying to like shift, and why I'm like, wait a minute, back here, is the medicine. And what we see with the medicine across that space. So let's take a look at that, right? When we're looking at science today, what we're looking at is something that have been eradicated in a group of people. When we look at 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, let's go with 3,000 years ago across the globe. Across the globe, 3,000 years ago, we're seeing surgeries. There's brain surgeries, trepanation across the globe at 3,000 years ago. Across the globe, 3,000 years ago, we are seeing, in Egypt, there's plastic surgery by then, where they're shaving the chin and the cheeks to create better cheek and chin lines in ancient, in noble women, right? In ruling class women, and we're seeing it in the mummies, in ancient mummies, my brain. So when we're looking at medicine and science across the globe at 3,000 years ago, we're seeing a globe where medicine science is really equal in its concept. We do see that there is medicine that goes back way prior to that. We also see that there is science that goes back way prior to that. And we're going to touch on a couple of those, but I want you to know that at 3,000 years ago, we all have a concept of medicine and science across the globe. And you know this when you think about a lot of the things that you've been told, right? We all know about Plato and Aristotle and the ancient Greek scientists, philosophers, people who performed medicine. We know that there was medical attempts within the Roman gladiators. A lot of people know about the plastic surgery in mummies, or things like there's actually a full hip replacement and a full knee replacement in ancient mummies in Egypt. That are beautiful, just stunning, using silver, which is antimicrobial, which means that they're less likely to infect, right? So there's also not a lot of people know about the trepanation, which is basically drilling a hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain. And that drilling of the hole in the skull to relieve the pressure on the brain gives the ability for, like after an injury, it gives the ability for the brain to recover, right? And so we see trepanation in mummies in South America. We see trepanation in the Arabian Peninsula. And by this point, by 3,000 years ago, it should be understood that Asia's medicine has always been extremely advanced. Asia's medicine started advanced. Asia in science has always like just been steps ahead of really anywhere else, right? I mean, we all know that gunpowder comes from Asia, right? Like this is something that, and when we look at Otzi's tattoos, and Otzi is oh, I'm horrible with dates. And I want to say he's like 6,000 years ago, but I want to say. Okay, so he's 5,000 years ago. So Otzi's 5,000 years ago, and Otzi's tattoos are on the meridians that are associated today in acupuncture. And we see tattoos as medicine through acupuncture through from there. Like those are the first tattoos we see as medicine concentrating on acupunctural lines, but we have seen tattoos as medicine concentrating on acupunctural lines since then, right? So by 3,000 years ago, science and medicine is really everywhere. I can't give you documentation of stuff here in Turtle Island, North America. What I can give you is the understanding that was had when Europeans came here. And what I can give you is the land itself. So science itself is a space of science itself is the act of I observe something, I predict or I hypothesize what that observation might mean. I predict what I can do about that hypothesis, and then I test out that prediction. If the testing proves true, then my theory, right, my observation, my hypothesis is now a fact. If my tests prove false, then I have to go back to the hypothesis. So when I am looking at science across the globe, what I'm seeing when you're looking at science here in Turtle Island, what you're seeing is that when Europeans are landing in Turtle Island from north to south, east to west, Turtle Island itself was a garden. And this was documented by all the Europeans when they came here. It's documented on each coast. It's documented by the Spaniards. It's documented by the French. It's documented by the Europeans. It is legitimately north to south, east to west, coast to coast, a garden. It is all tended. It has easy ways through it. The forests are kept clean and tended so that you can move through the forests and so that they don't burn down all the time, right? It has huge, vast prairies that are actually open grasslands of food, right? That are actually providing multitudes of nutrients. And all of this stuff is documented, and all of this stuff can be seen. There's still places that you can see this today. It can be seen in the documentation of the clearing out of most of this stuff. Things like that don't actually subsist very well in the archaeological record, right? So if I rip out an entire fucking 3 foot, I'm ripping out the last several thousand years. Every time I rip out 3 feet of anything, I'm ripping out the last several thousand years of archaeological record, right? And if I've just been doing that willy-nilly without care for 500 years, there's not a lot to be seen, right? So and keep going back.
Now,
Da, 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 da. Sorry, it will freeze on me, but I'll come back when it freezes on me. It does. And I don't know why. I'm not sure what's going on. Like, I really don't know why. I've tried so many different things to try and figure out what it is. That's what I do. Oh, well, when it freezes on me, I just turn off the program and come back in, right? I mean, I think that it's going to be subjective on where you're at, what 3 feet is. And I frequently say I suck ass at numbers. Numbers don't work for me. And so because numbers don't work for me, anything that relates to it kind of has a hard time to rest in my brain. So you're still 1,000 years is, and when you're looking at the sustainable, when you're looking at, if you walk into a meadow and you rip the top 3 feet of the meadow out, you now do not know what the grass was in that meadow. You do not know what the plant life and the animal life was in that meadow. You do not know what animals shat in that meadow most recently. You do not know what died in that meadow within the last 10 years or 1,000 years or 50 years, right? You do not know the science of the biome of that meadow because you ripped out the meadow to replace it, usually with monocrop agriculture, right? So with that, when I'm talking about the understanding of the science of the understanding of the science that comes within the biome understanding, the science that comes from the interaction of honorable harvest and the tending within the biome. When we're talking about that, ripping up the top 3 feet of any biome is going to take out all of that information. You're going to lose all of that information. I need to turn the comments off. Is what I need to do. So if it goes, you can always comment over on YouTube. And if it starts freezing, I'll be back. I promise. When we are looking at indigenous science, though, when we're looking at science, if we look at 3,000 years ago across the globe and where we're at, and we look at why certain areas no longer had that, what we see is that around 400, most of Europe started losing that because the Roman Empire decided to go to monotheism to help one of their emperors become the sole emperor, and to help him in his war to become the sole emperor. And once monotheism became the concept for the Roman Empire using it as a state religion, having colonized and controlled most of Europe, spread that. And at the start of that spread, there is science, there is knowledge, there is understanding within the Roman Empire that gets stamped out with that spread. So science and medicine being within Europe as an indigenous practice is an absolute. It absolutely happened. Europe had science and medicine going back thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Otzi is found in Europe, right? Europe has science and medicine going back ages. It gets stamped out. And when it gets stamped out there, it ends up stamped out around every space that space then in turn colonizes. Colonization is the act of taking your government and your religion and your thought processes into a space that already has a government, religion, and thought process and replacing it with yours, replacing theirs with yours. It's done through acts of violence. So in the spaces that were colonized, science and religion get stamped out. As we're moving across, we see that this goes back and back and back in all of these spaces. Again, when we go to the concept that science is, I observe in nature, or the definition of what science is. I observe in nature. I have a hypothesis or an idea of what that observation means. I predict what my idea means, right? I take that prediction and test that prediction And if the test proves true, I now have a theory or stone tool actuality from the hypothesis. If the test proves false, then I now have to go back to the hypothesis, my idea, and go, okay, so my idea is, but that prediction of what that is didn't work. So when we look at the first advent of stone tool, many species use tools. Corvids use tools. Primates across the board use tools. There are, dolphins will make tools out of bubbles, right? They make nets out of bubbles and stuff like that. So there are species across the planet that utilize tools. So the first tool usage we now know within the last couple of years comes from Paranthropus boisei, not Homo habilis. Paranthropus boisei, or nutcracker man, making the Oldowan tool complex starting at 3.3 million years ago, roughly. We see the Oldowan tool complex stays the same, and it has no. The Oldowan tool complex is very basic. The Oldowan tool complex is I chip flakes off, and I use those flakes as blades, right? It's a single edge. And it's also hammerstones and cobblestones. Cobblestones are kind of flat rocks. And hammerstones, think of like a cobblestone for your fire. And hammerstones are rocks that have a kind of, they're usually a little bit like circular, more oval, but they have a bit of a flat bottom to them, right? So that you can pound with your hammerstone on the cobblestone. The cobblestone is where you put your thing and you pound, break open bone, butcher things, break open nuts, do different things so that you can actually get to whatever it is you're utilizing and making. Stone tools are the only thing that we find in the archaeological record, but it needs to be understood that they're not the only tools that we've ever used. We've used tools of wood throughout, right? Plants, things like that, a leaf to hold your stuff, right? So the first to take this concept of I can take and utilize the stones around me as tools. If I hit specific stones in specific ways, they kind of flake off and I can get single edges. These are generally not flint. These are generally expedient, meaning something that you found nearby, right? Something that you're able to collect from the area around you, right? If I take that and I conceptualize, observe this action, right? And I try to take that idea and predict what I can do with that idea to make this different and better, this is science. When I do that and take this concept of tools, the Oldowan tool complex, from a single blade, a single cutting edge, right, to a dual bladed or the teardrop shaped Acheulean hand axe, right? What I'm doing is enacting science. I am observing, I'm having an idea or hypothesis, I'm predicting what that idea or that hypothesis means, and in predicting what that idea and that hypothesis means, I am turning that into something I test, actuality. I know that if I break these stone tools in a specific way, that I get this specific outcome, a single-bladed thing, a single-bladed scraper. Maybe if I observe me doing that and I hypothesis, maybe if I break it a different way, I'll get two sides, or maybe I could get two sides. I predict, well, maybe if I break the other side, I can get two sides. I test. I break the other side and I start the journey of having a bi-faced blade, right? So this is the action of science. This is the activity of science that predates your species. It's as far back as Homo erectus. This action of science translates from the earliest of the stone tools to the act of fire, to the control of fire, right? Because we see within Homo erectus that Homo erectus is the first to control fire. We've recently found it out that things like fermentation actually have helped brain growth and development as well. Yet the utilization of fire is actually one of the largest contributors to brain growth and development, and it is how we get the brains that we have. So Homo erectus's ability to control fire, which is an ability to utilize scientific thought process and create the ability to control fire and therefore cook their food. Cooking food gives a higher caloric intake for a less amount of food, right? So that gives you the brain that you have. That gave the brain growth and development that Homo erectus passes down to all the other species around it, all its descendant species around it, right? And we see that with us, we see it with Neanderthals. Neanderthals actually have a bigger brain than we do. And we see it really across the board. And so with that, I like to point out, or I like to think of it as it is the science that Homo erectus had that creates you, right? We're actually scientifically created, but we're scientifically created by our grandparent species, because our grandparent species utilization of science creates us, right? Just like our utilization of science may eventually, and has created entire new species out there, right? It is down low, so let me go ahead and turn him back on for a bit and see if we can, if it'll be okay. It gets really, my brain gets too fried and I can't concept. I can't think or stay in a space, and then you get frazzled. And I'm frazzled anyway, so it doesn't make it any easier or better. So when we are looking at that science translating down, we see that science translates down into, Neanderthals, into Heidelbergensis, into Denisovan. It translates down into all the other species, because we see this. They found that 500,000 years ago, Heidelbergensis has wooden buildings, Lincoln log kind of wooden buildings, right? We know that Neanderthals cross water. We know that Homo erectus crosses water. And we know that this concept of changing, of adapting the adaptations translates down into Neanderthal and translates down into us, right? We see that the concept of, it's not even a concept. To me, I believe that one thing that really sets us apart, or what I've seen, what I've observed, and I've been asked 1,000 times from a philosophical nature to a scientific nature, in many different settings, what is it that sets human apart? And everybody has a different idea. Some people think that we're smarter, and I disagree. Some people think that we're more compassionate, and I disagree. Some people think that, there's a lot of different amazing things and a lot of different wow things. Personally, to me, the one thing that I see that really sets us apart is we adapt our adaptations. Everything else adapts. Everything else adapts the world around it, and everything else adapts to the world around it. We adapt our adaptations, not just the adaptations of our body, but the adaptations of the world, right? Like, so by taking the first stone tools, the Oldowan tool complex, into the Acheulean hand axe, Homo erectus, as really the first true, to my mind, human. I think habilis, we've named habilis handyman mainly because of the fact that we associated with the Oldowan tools, and we named him Homo mainly because we associated with him with Oldowan tools, and that has shifted and changed in the last year. So, but we adapt our adaptations. Human adapts its adaptations. The beaver has built the same dam forever. It's a beautiful dam. It has no need to adapt it. It has no need to change it, right? It might adapt it in the middle of a different stream, right? It might have to, know that, in this kind of water, you have to put a log across here a little bit different, right? But a beaver hasn't taken that apartment complex that a beaver has, because that's what it is, right? It's an apartment complex with a fridge. The beaver has an apartment complex with a fridge, right? The beaver's apartment complex with a fridge has been the same apartment complex with a fridge the entire time. We went from, well, I don't think we lived in caves as long as we think we did, right? But we went from living in the environment as we found it to adapting the environment to our needs, to adapting those adaptations, right? So living in the environment as we found it, if we're talking about caves or living in the cave as we found it, then we start adapting the cave. We start making sure that there's stone walls across, and we have proof of this archaeologically, right? We start making sure that there's stone walls across the front, probably coupled with things like brushes and stuff like that, like big old fronds of shit or big old tree branches to kind of block it out so that you're narrowing your entrance so predators can't get in, right? So we adapt our, we decide to utilize this space. We adapt that space. Then much earlier, I think, than we think. I think that as soon as we start butchering animals and taking their hides, we're probably using those hides as not just for clothing, but we're probably also utilizing those hides for shelter. And it doesn't take a whole lot for you to take a couple of sticks and a hide. And if you're leaving your home to do any form of migration or movement, you unless you're migrating on a specific pattern that your group has always your community has always migrated on, right? Like, and so you have your winter home and your summer home, you have your winter cave and your summer cave, right? Unless you're migrating on that pattern, you're not going to leave your home for the unknown without a way to sleep at night. Not being able to sleep at night kills. Not being able to safely sleep at night and keep your family safely asleep at night kills. And there's no way I'm going to live 300 years, several generations of safety to get myself killed or my family killed, right? So if I don't know that there's a way for me to shelter at night. So I would state that by the time we really start migrating out of areas, moving out of areas, we have some form of an ability to give ourselves shelter, right? Are we talking about violence? Or extreme? Or yeah. So you need some form of shelter. And to me, I mean, simple brush shelters, you're not going to, even if you, sometimes it's hard for me to remember that not everybody had the childhood that I had. Even a simple, thought that time it actually had like banned me because it went black. Even a simple brush shelter is, like that's not going to show up in the archaeological record. And a simple brush shelter, as simple as like, as you're traveling, you find an outcrop of stone, right? And you know that you're going to grab wood to drag that over to the outcrop of stone, and you're going to stack that along that outcrop of stone, right? You might, travel for, most of the day. And then when the sun starts to go down, you start looking, right? Things like that. You're going to need that ability to know that there's safety for your community at the end of the day. So I personally believe that by the time we were using hides to make clothing, we're probably using hides as some form of shelter as well, some form of warmth anyways, right? Because to conceptualize putting it on my body, I'm probably already conceptualizing, bringing it into my home and providing warmth with it, right? But that's my conceptualization of it. When we're looking at, let me get back on track. I apologize. We can see that these concepts of adapting or adaptations translate down from Homo erectus into all of the species that come from Homo erectus. We see it within Homo neanderthal and Homo denisovan. Like I was saying, we see within Homo heidelbergensis. Homo heidelbergensis is using wood to use Lincoln logs and make buildings, right? There's Lincoln logs to make some form of a building structure that they found at 500,000 years ago. They are seeing that the significant changes, there's another significant shift from a Schulian hand axis to a new significant shift in tool conception and structure, especially in Asia, like 900,000 years ago. And it says elephants are dying out and they're hunting smaller deer. And so they have to shift their concepts of the tool usage so that they can actually adapt their adaptation into smaller bone structures, more delicate butchery, right? We see the usage of clothing coming in. They say, so I've seen a couple of different dates on it. My thought process is that it's probably somewhere in the middle. So I would say probably roughly, you know, 800, 900,000 years ago, you're going to start seeing actual wearing clothing on the body, or, you know, wearing hides. And then they have found the ability to what we call tailor, which means putting the clothing, like making armholes and sewing the sides so you have less airflow in like hip bones, where you can see the marks of an awl, where you're puncturing holes in the leather so that you can push sinew through, or push more leather through to sew up the edge of this fabric. They see this in like a hip bone at like 40,000 years ago. So, and that one might be 50,000 years ago, because that one they think is Neanderthal. And in this space, I think that they would have to have it as 50, but I can't remember exactly on the date. And this is all evidence of taking adaptations and adapting them. So this is all evidence of science. Medicine is another evidence of science, right? We see medicine as far back as Neanderthals 90,000 years ago. Many of us have heard of the Earth Children series, Jean M. All's Earth Children series. Jean M. All's Earth Children series got her honorary PhDs in several universities in anthropology, because she sat down and she studied and she researched and she tossed it into a book, right? And so it's pretty factual for the time, right? We now know that some things are different, right? We absolutely know that Neanderthals had the same styles of speech, or the same ability of speech that we did. And so that's totally different. But Kreb from the Earth's Children series is Old Man Shanidar, or Shanidar 1. Shanidar is in Iraq, and Kreb is 90,000 years ago. And I think it's either him or La Chapelle, Old Man of La Chapelle is actually female, so old woman. But Old Man of Shanidar, or Shanidar 1 is, he had an injury to the head early on, and it caused his bones to atrophy. It caused his right side to atrophy. I believe it's his right side. And he lost the use of his arm. Okay, so it's saying, I'll be right back.
We've done more.
It was saying that I didn't have any activity. So I'm assuming what it was doing was it's not actually connecting right. Give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can get it to connect a little differently, and maybe it won't do that anymore. Try something else. So I'm gonna hope and pray. Let me try a couple of different things, and maybe we'll stay. Um, so we see with Kreb that Kreb was injured and Kreb was taken care of and tended to. Not only do we see that he was taken care of and tended to when his entire right side atrophies, right? We see that he ended up blind in one eye completely. And I believe that the injury is to the left side of the head and it's the right side that was affected, but I can't remember exactly. But I believe it's his left eye that he's blind in. If I've got my sides mixed up, I apologize. His left eye that he's blind in fully and then partially and then fully deaf and then partially deaf and was needing of care, right? Consistent, constant care, right? Are we arguing about? Okay, so we see research that says both of those things. I just want to make sure that people understand, and I want to make sure that people remember that there are nations that that's part of their migration story. The Beringia space is actually part of their migration story. So we need to make sure that, and I need to make sure that I honor that, right? So it's important that we honor that. That there are nations whose research shows that they are having, or whose migration stories say that they came across on they migrated across that area. So, and there are 3 waves that they're talking about currently, right? And actually, I think that there's actually more than 3 waves because the 3 that they talk about that I've heard of don't take into account the one that I know that is being studied that's even earlier. So there might be 4 waves, right? But I know of one being studied that's 54,000 years ago and it's through the South Pacific. And then there's another one that's being studied at 21,000 years ago that's along the Kelp Highway. And then there's the thought process of the 18 to 15-year-old pathway open in the way that Beringia was set up. And then there's also migration at 8,000 years ago. They can cross the boats, right? And that's, I think that that's true. Like, is to my recollection, to my memory, the DNA connection between anybody who has that migration story is northern. It's all northern, right? And then to my recollection, so I don't have a whole lot of recollection, though, of anybody being referred to as Beringiers or Berengiers within the archaeological concepts. So, to my recollection, we know that the land bridge passage that would have created that ability was closed by 15,000 years ago, right? And so, anybody who would come from that space would have been, not in that space anymore. The connection between that migration story in being in northern nations is absolutely factual. But we have evidence of people coming, and I know that we also have evidence of that migration at 8,000 years ago not being in connection with the migration, the land bridge migration, right? It's just that we have to look at it. Okay, I don't think that that's what it's saying. Okay, so I see what you're talking about. I think I know what you're talking about. So, pulling up an article, you're talking about the new information with Lucia that shows that Lucia was 100% Amerindian, right? That she's 100% from the Western Hemisphere. Is that the what you're talking about? Um, and in this, what they're stating in the article is, so they're still focused on DNA strain 9 repeat allele. You said it's nine repeat allele. So when they're talking about Western Beringians in the 9 repeated allele, so in all sampled Native American and Western Beringian populations, the Western Beringian populations that they're talking about is modern day Alaskan natives. So you know with that. And I'm not stating that. I'm stating that in the article, what it states is, so I'm looking at the actual NCBI article on the 9 repeat allele, right? Haplotypic background of a private allele at high frequencies in the Americas, right? In all sampled Native American and Western Beringian populations. What I'm stating is that in that phrase, when they're talking all modern or all sampled Native American and Western Beringian populations, Native American, they're referring to those within the United States as the Native American population. In the Western Beringian population, they're referring to those within the main area of the United States as Native American. And the Western Beringian population, they're referring to First Nations people and Native Americans in Alaska. That's what they mean by the Western. You're probably right. I apologize. Again, east, west, north, south. They suck in my brain. Western Beringia would absolutely be Siberia. Sorry, when they were saying it, I popped it as the east and not the west. Thank you for that correction. I appreciate that. So what this is stating is that within all copies of the 9 repeat allele were identical by descent, and that the geographic distribution. So what is it that is supposed to? So Luzia has this. Okay, that makes sense. You can ask me a question. Absolutely, honey boo. So Bran, you need to stop. Honeyboo, it depends on what you're thinking of with cave people. I don't typically use a lot of books myself anymore just because of the fact that information gets so outdated so quickly. If you're looking, I mean, we were just talking about the Earth's Children series by Jean M. All. It's really good for reading and it's pretty factual. And then had a couple that I've read recently, but I don't. I'm really kind of iffy about books anymore. Yeah, and I don't think I have any on there. There is one that I read about archaeology within Britain, but that's more recently. I really don't have any actual good books to read on it anymore. There are some different articles depending on where you want to go with it. There's a few documentaries or a few people to follow, like Lee Berger is the one who's doing everything on Homo naledi. Lee Berger is on my website, I believe. Maybe not. Maybe I changed it up. Let me find. Yeah, under bibliographies, who I can recommend is at the very bottom. Lee Berger is there, and and Minuteman is there. I don't know if Lee is there, but Dr. Chang is there. Please stop, Bran. I would go and start with articles, honestly. Most books, it's a little bit difficult for me because a lot of the books, by the time they're getting written, some of the information is outdated. Or like Sapiens, I haven't been able to read the whole thing. People have told me it's good, but I also know that it's using evidence that's not true. Or at least, I mean, so my history was before I did archaeology and anthropology for a degree, I got a degree in radiography. And so like bones is something that I do. And injury to bone is something that I kind of see, like I can look at it and go, okay. But the injury that they're referring to in Sapiens doesn't look like what they say it is. And so I'm not sure what I think about that. I like Minuteman on YouTube. He's pretty cool, though he doesn't go back too far. And then I like, I just look at articles anymore, really. There are a lot of them on my website, though, that you can use to start with. And then it's also just where are you looking at, like what time period, because cavemen tends to refer to a broad time period. Like paleoanthropology is a pretty broad time period anyways. But cavemen tends to, like, for most people, refer to everything before like 30, 40,000 years ago. So back to the medicine. When we're looking at medicine and we're looking at how we can see medicine with an archaeological record, a couple really significant finds that people aren't aware of is Skelly. Skelly is a find from within the last couple of years. This was 31,000 years ago in Borneo. And this is a girl whose was amputated 9 years before she died. 6 to 9 years, they say, but before she died. She was 19 when so she was roughly, you know, in her early double digits when the foot needed to be amputated. This find to me, I love this find on so many levels. Again, I did radiography before I did anthropology for degrees. And within radiography, um, I've had to be in on surgeries, on amputations. I did fluoroscopy and stuff like that. And in being in on amputations, I know what amputations look like. I know what post-op looks like, right? Um, this foot amputation, if I remember correctly, it's her left foot, was done with such a clean slice of the blade that they know that they used obsidian for the blade. Obsidian can be sharpened to such a fine point because it's such a hard substance that it can actually cut between cellular structures. They still use it today in microsurgery to cut between cellular structures. Your best blades, your best scalpels are obsidian blades, right? Because you can cut between cellular structures. And so we know that they used let me actually pull this one up for everybody to see on YouTube. We know that they used an obsidian blade because of the fineness of the cut. The bone remodeling shows that she lived for 6 to 9 years afterwards. And this also tells us that they had to use an antiseptic to ensure that she didn't get infection, right? It tells us that they knew the structure of the body enough to ensure that she healed and didn't get infection and didn't bleed out. And it also shows us that they had some form of painkiller, some form of anesthetic, because of the fact that when you amputate a lower limb, it sends the body into shock. One thing we really learned during the Civil War when we were low on medical supplies is that if somebody wasn't passed out when they amputated, so I don't think it's connecting right now. One thing that we learned during the Civil War was that if somebody wasn't passed out or medicated when they amputated, they'd die. It sends the body into shock when you amputate a lower limb without help. I'm going to go ahead and drop the live, and I'm going to go ahead and restart it. It's been bugging out for the last 10, 15 minutes, and I want to make sure that it stops bugging out. So I'm just going to go ahead and restart it. I will be back up in like 5 minutes, just enough time to shut everything down and restart everything up. Okay. So I'll be right back, everybody. And I am still here, YouTube. I'm just going to take a second to restart everything and see if I can maybe get the phone to work a little bit better and not act like this. I don't think there's anybody over here anyways. That's enough. Okay. See if it's going to work a little bit better. It kept freezing up on us, and I'm not sure why. I tried shifting things around, and that did not work. I'm going to see if we can get it back to where it was a little bit better, because it seemed like it was working for a while, and then it decided it wasn't working anymore. La da 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 la da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Nice. Okay, so with Skelly, what we're seeing is that the cut to the bone was so fine that had it been made with an obsidian blade. Obsidian is the hardest substance, really. It actually the blade that you get from obsidian tools is so fine that it is the only thing that can cut between cellular structures. KYA is thousands of years ago. It's the only thing that can cut between cellular structures. And because it's so fine, that's the only thing that can cut between cellular structures, we see that we still use it today in microsurgeries. So the leg on Skelly, and she is up on YouTube. I've got the article for her up on YouTube right now, is cut with an obsidian blade. The bone regrowth or remodeling on that is 6 to 9 years. So we know since she was 19 when she died that this amputation happened between, like, I think they think 11 and 13 or something like that. We know that because of the fact that when you amputate a lower limb, the body goes into shock, that you have to have some form of and I get these words mixed. Okay, so anesthesic, something that will calm the pain, knock somebody out, right? And there's evidence of those herbs in the area of antiseptic to prevent any form of sepsis to the wound. And since it healed cleanly for like 9 years, right, or at least 6 years, then obviously there was no sepsis. There was nothing going septic in the womb. There was no infection, right? We need to stop. So because of that, being annoying. Stop. Because of that, we see that there must be antiseptic use. There must be antisepsis or antiseptic. There must be painkillers used, and there must be things to clean. There must be things to take care of the wound while they're doing the surgery and keep it clean, and probably to rinse tools in, and then teas or something that somebody is drinking. They say that she had to have been an important member of society for somebody to attempt to do this and to do this. I disagree. I would state that in early communities, everybody is important. When you have a community of, at most a broader community of a few hundred people, your community requires everybody within it to sustain it, right? And so, well, your community well, you as an individual might not to be able to do one of the jobs that you or I might find important within a community. You're still doing an important job within the community, even if all you're doing is sitting by the fire and ensuring it stays, ensuring the fire is going, ensuring that the children aren't running off, right? Even if that's all you're doing, it's still a highly valuable use to the community. It is still a contribution to community. It is still a part of community, right? So when we're looking at that, I don't think that she had to have been a high valued member of society. I also think that when you look at this skill within this surgery, you know, it's a full foot amputation. It's 31,000 years ago. It's, like I said, I've sat in on surgeries. I've seen post-op for these things for a few years. Absolutely see that this is a fine surgery at 31,000 years ago, better than some of the surgeries you see today. So when that comes into play, the medical knowledge that we know is not only that they have to have the antiseptic, the way to get rid of the germs, they also had to have that thought process of getting rid of the pain because she could die otherwise. And I say she because biologically she is female. They also had to have a knowledge of anatomy. And the knowledge of anatomy would include the fact that you have to take the skin and pull it up so that when you release it, the flesh covers the bone again. It also includes the knowledge that you need to cut some of that skin and take that and flap it over to protect that wound, right? You can't just have an open wound. Even cauterizing an opened wound is worse, right? You have to have the knowledge of where the blood vessels are. And not only where the blood vessels are, but that you need to stop them from bleeding. This was likely done through cauterization, right? And you need to have the knowledge to provide care for this wound afterwards, right? Somebody also has to teach this child how to walk again, because now this child has to walk with a crutch. She's in a environment that is caves and hills, and a rough environment to get around, right? Where they found her at. So it's one of those spaces that you're going to see that, you know, she's going to need help learning how to walk through. She's going to need aids to walk through afterwards, right? So this is 31,000 years ago. Krebs is 90,000 years ago. We have evidence in Neanderthals at like 50,000 years ago of herbology, of utilizing of herbs that we see in the plaque in the teeth, that are not herbs that have a caloric intake, so you're not using them just to eat them. And they're not herbs that provide a good flavor. Their flavor is really ick. And so it's not likely that you would, and they're specific for stomach ailments or different kind of ailments that you can see associated in the teeth as well, right? So when we're looking at this medicine, we can see from Krebs, who is, you know, significantly La Chapelle I, the old man of Shanapdar, I mentioned him, or the old man of La Chapelle, I mentioned him when I mentioned one of these two is biologically female. La Chapelle I's arm is cut off, like missing. It's not an amputation, like it's not an intentional amputation, but it's cut off, it's missing. So those are both the Neanderthals. We see Skelly at 31,000 years ago in a cave in Borneo, right? Herbs associated in the cave show herbs that are even today used for antiseptics to get rid of germs, or for painkillers to, you know, get rid of pain or to heal, or to, you know, be able to get somebody to a point where they could go through a surgery. At 7,000 years ago, there's, I want to say in a farmer in the Middle East, but I can't remember geographically if it's the Middle East or if it's in the Mediterranean. It might be the upper Mediterranean, but I can't remember. Like my brain sees the land of the Middle East, but my mind's telling me, nope, that's not right. It's supposed to be something else. So there's a farmer in that area of the globe that has his forearm amputated. It's not as clean of an amputation to my knowledge as the one in Borneo, right? It's not necessarily an amputation with a Sidian blade and, to my memory, but I can't remember fully if it, doesn't have some significant things that show that it's advanced in some different ways, right? This shows medicine really advanced really early. And when we look at this advancement in medicine, like these surgeries really early, what we're looking at is, first you have to understand that in the archaeological record, for every 1,000 people, maybe you're getting one, maybe, right? One individual for every 1,000, maybe, right? And this means that for every 1,000 surgeries that are being performed, maybe you're getting one, right? So if you have a timeline of 500 years in a space that has, say, your primary communities are roughly 100 people and you're part of a broader community, maybe you're a primary community of 300 people by 30,000 years ago, and your broader community is maybe 1,000 people, right? Over the course of 300 years, that's several thousand people going through this space. You're not going to get a lot of those people in the archaeological record. And depending on what space in the archaeological record you're looking at, is also going to depend on whether or not you're ever going to get any. Like, the reason that we don't have DNA from Homo florensis and are unlikely to ever get DNA from Homo florensis is because Homo florensis is in an island in Indonesia where it's hot and it's wet, and hot and wet and DNA do not, they go on like gangbusters. They really do, because hot and wet takes DNA away. Like, it just degrades it very quickly. It degrades bone, it degrades structure very quickly, right? So when you're looking at a acidic fully submerged or a critic fully submerged environment, you'll see that will prolong things and stabilize things. When you're looking at a very hot, very dry environment, you're going to see that it can prolong and stabilize things. So when we're looking at the DNA, or not the archaeological record within some space like Borneo, you're looking at a space that's hot and wet. You're not going to find a lot of people over the course of years. And absolutely, there is stuff stolen and put in museums everywhere. Archaeology in its infancy was grave robbing and nothing more. It was really grave robbing and nothing more. Just like anthropology in its infancy was really just a justification for atrocity. It's just the unfortunate facts, right? We have to deal with the unfortunate facts of it. So I would say that to get to a point that you have this ability to do this exquisite of, I'm everything. Literally, I can trace my DNA to bones across this entire planet. And I know by family line and name across the globe. So it's not me, it's not y'all, and just me, right? So when we are, when we're looking at science and medicine, we can see that not only is science and medicine indigenous across the globe, that science and medicine across the globe go back millennia upon millennia upon millennia. We see trepanation brain surgery across South America. We also have to understand that the way that people interact with the world around them, I believe that the reason that we find our first burials at 90,000 years ago is because we had other kinds of burying 90,000 years ago. I believe it's because at 90,000 years ago, we decided in certain places some form of object permanence to the dead, right? Now, again, this is, I believe, because people are like, oh, we started burying at 90,000 years because we have, this object permanence, or, this shift in understanding. There's 1,000 different ways that they want to explain this away. And I agree with many of them. I also grew up with an understanding of an object impermanence about the dead being a returning to the earth. So if I were to take a family member that I loved truly and deeply and sit with that family member for, days, maybe even, and then take that family member out to the space that we loved to be the most. And the space that we loved to be the most was we really loved to sit on this rise, right? That we could see forever, right? We like to see forever. And so I'm sitting there with my family member on this rise, and I want to leave that family member on that rise. Why? Because that was their favorite space. And I know they're going to return to us because I believe that this is us instead of versus an environment. I know that they're going to return to us, to the energy that is all of us, to the interaction, right? So with that, I leave my family member out on a rise, which means that within 100 years, my family member is completely gone back into the environment, right? So I don't believe that we didn't bury our dead. We didn't have funerary rites for our dead prior to 90,000 years ago. I believe we've always had funerary rites for our dead. You see in animals semblance of funerary rites for your dead, right? You see the animals will sit with the dead, or like interact with it for a few days before they leave it so that it can go back into the environment, right? And I think that everything that is possible
TikTok changed.
It gave us the Mona Lisa. Hold on, let me see if I can. That's going to pause me, just so you know. Me getting the image will pause me, just so you know, because I've got a lot of images on my phone. Let me find. Oh, come on, Denny. Oh, hold on, I can't find Denny. 1 second. I have too many screenshots on my phone. I apologize. So my thing keeps pausing on me. I don't know why. Look at possibilitarian. The concept of possibilitarianism is the concept that anything that is, probabilitarianism. Thing that is probable is possible, right? And I think that a lot of the concepts out there are probable, and many of them are possible. So I'm not going to state how long I think that we've been on the planet, or whether I think it's really a planet or a friggin' hologram, because, you know, lots of things are probable, right? But evidence within the archaeological record as we understand it today is fact, right? And understand that most of this stuff is, you know, like the government is now telling us that aliens exist, right? I've always known aliens exist. I don't believe in the ancient alien concepts. Ancient alien concepts are generally very racist concepts, but I've always known that aliens exist, right? So, tanko, I try. Are looking at the way that science and medicine is translated down. Remember that in the beginning I stated that when science and medicine 3,000 years ago was the same across the globe, right? Let me first touch again on burial, because people will tell you there's not a lot of evidence of, there's not a lot of archaeological evidence in North America. The lack of archaeological evidence in North America actually contributes to the concept that people weren't here, right? For the extended long term that people were here. Evidence, and it was stolen. Washington journaled watching some trigger warning for shitty colonial behavior, first of all, especially to the many indigenous people in my comments. Okay, trigger warning. George Washington journals going out or watching from his property as an indigenous family comes to a mound and buries their dead, interrs their dead in this mound, a young woman in this mound, and all the honor and the love and the joy given to her. And after they left, documents going out and robbing the grave and taking everything. So the original archaeology within the United States had no care for the ancestry or the lives or the understanding or the humanity of the people around them, outside of the fact that they thought that they were beautiful and naive and innocent and kind and noble and generous, and therefore easy to rob blind, and therefore easy to traumatize. So we don't have a lot of archaeological evidence here within the United States because much of it was stolen. And the stealing of that is documented. And the stealing of that didn't go to museums. It didn't go to a collection for other people to see. It went to somebody's private collection to display to their friends in their basement, right? George Washington, this is in his own journals. It's in his own journals that he did this. He thought of himself as an amateur archaeologist, and he actually documents in his own journals. So this is in his own words. This is not nonsense. This is in his own words. Go and read his journals, get access to his journals. You can often even put in a search term. I would put in burial, right? Family, maybe. Young woman. So not only did they do it, but they documented it because they didn't care. And then you get to the fact that for many nations of indigenous people today across the globe, not just in the Northern Hemisphere, of the Western Hemisphere, okay, across the globe in many indigenous nations, interring of the dead is not something where I need to come back every year. Now, sometimes it is, as in the Bad Durenberg shaman, right? But most of interring of the dead is to return the dead to the biome, to give the dead back to the world, right? Because that's what it is. It's that interaction with the world, right? So that would be why there's not a lot of archaeological evidence of anything here in the northern part of the Western Hemisphere, right? It just is. When we look at what was documented when the Europeans arrived and what they documented, we see that there's advanced medicine here. We see that the history or record of actual disease here is pretty low. Now, first, let me state what I stated about there not being a lot of archaeological evidence does not mean that there is not archaeological evidence here. There is plenty of archaeological evidence here. There's archaeological evidence here that would and should always maintain its space in the earth itself. There are many non-invasive ways that we can get evidence these days, right? There is still archaeological evidence here. There is still, plenty. I'm stating that the lack that we currently have is in, the lack of knowledge and the few that we do have being so few for the amount of people that we know was here, and the lack of access to, or not lack of access, that I don't like that, the lack of current Western understanding of what some of that archaeological evidence means, that they do actually have access to, is limited, right? So I don't want it to be on any thought process that there is not archaeological evidence here at all. It's just that the archaeological evidence here, for the amount that has been taken, and for the amount of people that is here, is very low. And I would state that that also has to do with the fact that, like prior to 90,000 years ago, and like other spaces across the globe, I think that there is an activity of ceremony with the dead not being interring the dead in a space that they are permanently attached to, or might seem claustrophobic, right? Like, I have a problem with putting people in a box. My dog's ashes, because my ex had my dog when he died, are in a box, and I need to break it open and take it out and spread his ashes. Like, I have no problem putting things in a box, right? So for the lack of medical evidence here within the northern part of the Western Hemisphere, I would state that these are combinations of the reasons why there's a lack of medical evidence here when there is and I'm not saying that there isn't medical evidence here. I'm just saying my lack of knowledge of anything here is what I'm going to go with. We can still see across the globe that knowledge at 3,000 years ago is roughly the same, right? We see that the place that knowledge gets stamped out then spreads out and stamps out that knowledge and then recreates that knowledge. With a 1,000-year gap and a lack of connection to maintain the millennial worth of knowledge that was maintained in other spaces where that knowledge was not only not stamped out, but double down on, right? One thing that I like to show or like to point out when we're talking about the rise of violence and the rise of indigenous, or the rise of, sorry, I've got the dog whining and everybody running through the house now and it gets distracting. So I'm actually going to have to go after I finish this. So one thing that I point out when we talk about the rise of violence and the rise of monocrop agriculture is the fact that Western-based monocrop agriculture took something this size, much smaller than barley and wheat, right? And they took it into barley and wheat. Indigenous agriculture in the Western Hemisphere took something roughly the same size as that first grain over here, right? Corn's ancestor is roughly the same size as barley's ancestor, very small. And over an extended period of husbandry took something the same size from this little tiny thing to this huge grain that feeds so much. And they did this by weaving it into the environment, by making it a part of the environment and nurturing it within the environment and ensuring that all of the nutrients from the environment that the corn had started in, that maize started in its early form, right? Boosting that environment with agriculture across the globe, right? Not instead of here in the Western Hemisphere that was boosted, and it becomes something so big and so beautiful, right? Where we see wheat, barley being the same size and all of their tending and all of their nutrients ripped out and then be planted into a bare soil, right? That does not have all of the siblings to provide, all of the interaction to support, and not getting anything to provide that interaction and support. It not only destroyed the environment that it was in, but it took something that could have bloomed into something big and beautiful if it had been nurtured and fed and given siblings and given the community and the environment that the biome gives, into something much bigger than what it is today, right? So we do see in many different ways that science and that medicine was still in the Western Hemisphere, even if the colonial mindset has tried to wash it out and try to get rid of the majority of it, right? When we look at the way it stamps out and the way it replaces, we see just this refusal to hear others for a long time. It's finally starting to hear others. This is how we can see that science and medicine that is indigenous, that has maintained its indigeneity, that has maintained its roots, or has more recently lost its roots. Not lost, but had its roots threatened, right? When we see that that maintaining of that knowledge through millennium has happened, even if it is threatened, that the knowledge of the world around us that we're interacting with is deeper and way more understood. And we can see that that interaction, that knowledge is moving into Western science and Western medicine today. And in that moving into Western science and Western medicine, we see that the medical racism that is abhorrent and abundant, and the racism within the academic structure and the racism within the scientific structure, right, is starting to crumble, is starting to be pushed out, eradicated, stomped on. And we see that that shift in concept shifts our concept and our understanding as a collective of how we got to be here, of how we've come to this space, and of who we truly are. I'm going to cut it because I need to go, because there's so much, and it's about 2 hours anyways, and I'm trying to make sure that I don't go too long because my brain stops working. I like to say something at the end of my live, so stick around for just a minute while I get through the last of this bit. I didn't really go into a lot of how biologically we are nurturing and communal, but I can show you, and frequently do, and you can go back through all of my old lives on YouTube, that we are biologically nurturing and communal. Biologically, we must have community to give birth to our children because we have something called mandatory noob. This is what happens in my brain with my words when somebody makes a comment that I see, and something from one word, mandatory Nubians, almost came out of my mouth. I just want to state that. Mandatory midwifery. We have mandatory midwifery within our species. We are one of two species that's had mandatory midwifery. Neanderthals was the others. And this has to do with the size and shape of the pelvic outlet, and the size and shape of the head and the shoulders of the newborn, and the placement of the birth. We have to turn them twice to get them out, to go from facing their nose backwards to facing their nose forwards to come up. Some of us are extremely flexible. Some of us could absolutely reach down there. It's much more difficult when you're pregnant, but some of us are flexible. It's still not any majority of us, right? Like it's still, and some of us have smaller babies, right? It's still not, any majority that, the ultra small baby slipping out is, we are mandatory midwifery, which means that we must have community to give birth, right? And in the need to have community to give birth, we need to have community to also raise that child. We have 5 brain development stages from neonate to adult. And these brain development stages are what gives us the malleable brain that we have in the globular lobal shape that gives you all of your ability to adapt your adaptations, all of your ability to be questioning, all of your abilities to do all the things that we think that we're amazing for doing, right? So to do that, we must have nurturing through each of those brain development stages. No other animal on this planet takes 5 years to be able to feed themselves and walk. Even in other extended stages of childhood or adolescence, like elephants and bonobos and whales, we still do not see any other animal that takes 2 years to be able to walk. 2 years for its brain to develop all the neurological pathways of understanding to get to the point that it can make that thought process. Be right back. So biologically, we are nurturing and communal. And since biologically we are nurturing and communal, these are things that we need to be able to grow, to thrive, to live. These are things that we need because we are biologically nurturing and communal. They are the things that we need for brain development. They are the things that we need to be able to grow to full adulthood. They're the things that we need to be able to interact and to actually live. Even today, it takes a community to raise an infant from neonate to adult, whether it's your grocery store owner, your landlord, your babysitter, your parents, your office, your boss. It takes all of these people to provide the different things that you need to be able to do the different things in modern society that you need to do. Throughout the history of us, throughout the story of us, we have always had a broader community that needed to do this, right? I think when it paused last time, I lost like 30 people. When we are looking at being biologically nurturing and communal and needing those things to be able to thrive and to be able to survive, we live in a society that doesn't give any of us any of that. We are taught that community is a bad thing. Don't take care of your neighbor. We didn't talk about racism and othering as much as we usually do in here, but you are taught to hate your neighbor instead of hate the government that's trying to take care of you in the funnest of ways. So as we are so busy hating our neighbor, we've lost this community. As we're taught that narcissistic parenting is loving parenting because some deity from 5,000 years ago states that narcissistic parenting is loving parenting, then we are creating a bunch of children who don't have the nurture and the need that they have. We have created a society where our base needs are not met. Your base needs for life are food, shelter, nurture, community, right? You need to have these base needs met so that you can thrive, so that you can human. We live in a society where those aren't met. Many of us are depressed. Many of us are anxious. Many of us think that there's a problem. Many of us are having a problem. And we think that there's a problem. Think that they're having a problem because we're having a healthy response to an unhealthy society, an unhealthy world, a world that is really teaching us that everything we need is something we don't need, and teaching us to ignore our needs on a broad scale to suit somebody else's desires, right? I want you to know today that you are worthy of love, you're worthy of nurture, you are worthy of community, you are worthy of safety, you are worthy of space, you are worthy just by breathing. The right to life comes with the drawing of first breath, which is when life starts by the Bible and when life starts by science, the drawing of first breath. The right to life comes with the drawing of first breath. And when you have that right to life, you have the right to safety. That means you are worthy of it. You have the right to nurture and community. That means you are worthy of it. You have the right to food and shelter. That means you are worthy of it. You do not have to be exploitable by anybody to be worthy. By anybody. Not your leaders, not your family, nobody. You do not have to be exploitable by anybody to be worthy. For many of us, we don't feel like we have a lot of love. And we feel very alone. I want to remind you that oftentimes when we think that nobody loves us, there are people around us who actually care and love us. Sometimes it might not come across that way. And if it comes across toxic, it's okay for you to go, yeah, no, that's not love. Okay. But if somebody's quiet, they might truly love you. And I don't mean, hey, baby, I mean, care for you, right? There are people out there who love you and care for you, whether you realize it or not. And I absolutely love you and care for you just because you're alive and you're breathing. And more so because anybody who can sense that there's a problem can help fix the problem. The problem is we have disconnected from everything. There has to be a solution. What's the solution? Land back on a global scale returns tending and governance to Indigenous people on a global scale, which returns this concept and thought process of animism, which is communal, which is a taking care of the globe itself and taking care of all the people in the community of the globe, considering the animals and the earth itself as community, taking care of nurture. Okay. Land back on a global scale, returning tending and governance to Indigenous people on a global scale means that we turn back the destruction of the planet that's happening. And I don't mean climate change, because climate change happens. I mean the climate destruction that we are causing that is killing us. Not the planet, but killing us because of our disconnect, right? And we also get rid of the concept of disconnect as being a positive, so communal coming together, right? That concept gives us the ability to move forward. Capitalism is killing us, and it's been killing us for 10,000 fucking years since the narcissistic God Kings decided to utilize fear to get you to hate everybody else but them so they could hoard from you, right? So if we get rid of that colonial concept of greed, of exploitation, and return tending and governance across the globe, right? Today, take care of yourself and love yourself. Take care of yourself and love yourself. You deserve it. You are worthy of it. You don't have to do anything to be worthy of it. You are worthy of it just by existing. You're worthy of it just by breathing. And you do not have to be exploitable. You do not have to be exploited. You are worthy just by drawing breath. Just by drawing breath. Okay? Much love to everybody. Take care of yourself. Take care of the world around you as well. Okay? And I will be back in a couple days. My house might clear out a little bit. I also have a trip next week, so you might be seeing me from another state. Take care. Much love, everybody. Have a great one. Bye. Take care, YouTube. Have a great one. Bye.